Hi, this is Maggie. In this video, we're going to talk about how to change column names and extract column vectors from a data frame in R. Let's jump in, and I urge you to follow along with me in RStudio as I work. Pause the video and play around with the ideas periodically to make the best sense of them. The scripts that I write for these videos are available in my GitHub repository. There's a link in the description. So here I have the script from the last video renamed to columns_practice.r because we're going to edit it and I'll upload the new version. I will link the earlier video here and in the description. The script downloads a table of data in CSV or comma-separated values format from ourworldindata.org and then does some simple manipulations to illustrate vector operations. There's a link in the description to the data. I'm going to run the script by typing Control-Shift-Enter, the source with echo command, and we can watch it execute in the console tab below the script. Now, once that's run, we see some variables in the global environment. AI_invest is the name of the table we read in. It says 130 observations of 4 variables. Let's type view AI invest in the console. That's view with an uppercase V. That will bring the table up so we can see the names of the columns and we can scroll through the data. I've been referring to this as a table, but what is the name for this data structure in R? Let's use the str function, short for structure. So in the console, type str, open paren, AI invest, close paren. And R responds with some information about the data structure. The first thing is the class or type of the structure. And we're going to call this a data frame. You can see data frame last in the list. It's actually a specialized data frame that's part of the tidyverse called a tibble. But for our intents and purposes, it's a data frame. The data type determines what will happen when we invoke certain functions with our data structure. And then notice the different column headings listed here, colon, and then a data type and length, and then the first few values for that column. For example, entity, character, 1 to 130, agricultural tech, repeated 4 times. So we have a vector called entity with 130 values, and it starts with 4 values that are all agricultural tech. And we can see that in our view above. Notice that one of the column names is very long, total private investment by focus area inflation adjusted. One way that we can extract and manipulate columns in our data frame is by using the column name. So I would like to shorten that. There's a function in R called callNames. If we type callNames AI invest in the console, R responds by showing us the column names. That is a vector of character data. In other words, each column name in the vector is text. Now, sometimes we want to change column names because they have spaces in them and we can't use them to index into the data frame. In this instance, it's just because that one column name is so long. So the first way we're going to do this is when we read the table in. I used the reader function read_CSV. Let's type $read_CSV in the console and look at the help. And you can see there are a lot of options to control how we read data in. One of the parameters is call_names, and it says the default is true. Let's scroll down and look at the details of that parameter. It says either true, false, or a character vector of column names. If true, the first row of the input will be used as the column names and will not be included in the data frame. If false, column names will be generated automatically, x1, x2, x3, etc. If callNames is a character vector, the values will be used as the names of the columns, and the first row of the input will be read into the first row of the output data frame. Okay, so in our CSV, the first row is the column names, and if we provide a vector of column names, read_CSV will try to read the column names in as data. So let's look for a parameter that will ignore the first row. And we see skip with a default value of 0. And if we read that description, it says the number of lines to skip before reading data. So let's try first editing the script to read the data in with these new parameters. And I'm just going to delete the rest of the script because it uses the old column names, and we're going to do other stuff in this script. So I'll add the two named parameters. I'll write skip equals 1, and I'll write call names equals, and this is a character vector. To make a vector of characters, what we call strings in other languages like Python, we'll use the C function, short for concatenate. So C open paren, and then I'll write entity, in quotes, comma, code, year, invest, close paren. And let's add a view command after that and run the script with Control-Shift-Enter. And when we look at the data frame, it has the column names we want, and it didn't accidentally read in the first line as data. So that's one way to change your column names. Now, I'm going to copy the code that reads the data in and paste it below in the script, and remove our new named parameters so we can read in again with the old long column name. This script will start with different ways to change the column names. So we'll run it. And if we look at the view, our table is back to the old names. Now I can change that one column name a few ways using the call names function. First of all, I can just assign a whole new set of column names. So I can write, after I read the CSV in, call names AI invest is assigned the value of, which is how I read left angle bracket dash like an arrow. And then we'll use our concatenated list from before, C entity code year invest. And we'll run the script. And we're back to our short column names. Now, column names, as I mentioned, is a vector of character data. We can index into the vector, and we can assign to one element of the vector. So let's give one of the columns a new name. Let's rename entity to focus area by writing call names AI invest, open square bracket 1, close square bracket, is assigned the value of focus area. I'm putting that in quotes, and I'm putting an underscore where the space would be between the words. And we run the script. And that first column name is now focus area. Let's break that assignment down. Call names AI invest is a vector of character data, or I still think of it as a vector of strings of character data. Let's type call names AI invest in the console. You can see that R responds with a vector of 4 elements, the 4 names for the 4 columns in our data frame. I'm going to type the up arrow to get that command back. And now I'm going to index into that vector by adding a 1 in square brackets. And now we get back the first element of the vector, focus area. So with that on the left side of our assignment statement in the script, it becomes the location of that value in the vector that we're assigning into. And let's look at one other way, which is a little more general. Sometimes it can be useful to know how to write a general solution in data analytics, although quite often we are working with a very specific data set, and we don't need to do so in a general way. However, there might be times when you want to write a function to do something that you must do repeatedly, and so finding more general ways to solve problems is useful. So for this fourth way to change a column name, I'm going to create a variable called cnames and assign to that call names AI invest. I'll then change one of the column names. Let's change code to unknown, since that column contains no values. And then I'll assign that set of column names back to the data frame by writing call names AI invest is assigned the value of cnames. And we run the script, and we can see that the second column is now called unknown. Okay, so that's a very useful thing to be able to do, because one of the quickest ways to reference a column in a data frame is by using the $ operator. So for example, if I type AI invest $focus area in the console, I get the column. A column is a vector. A data frame is a list of vectors that are all the same length. Generally, if the data frame is in tidy format, the columns represent variables and the rows represent observations. So the values in each of the columns at index 4, for example, together make one observation. In this data frame at index 4, in each of the respective column vectors, we have agricultural tech for focus area, NA for unknown, 2020 for year, and 674,825,903 for invest. That means that over 670 million was spent on agricultural tech AI in 2020. The observation comprises the pieces of data at index 4 in each vector. Now, how else can we get at an individual column? Because a data frame is a special sort of list, one in which each column has the same number of elements, we can use list indexing syntax, which is the name of the data frame and then 2 open square brackets, the index, and 2 closed square brackets. Let's do that in the console. It's important when we perform an operation that we understand the data type of the result, so we know what we can do with the result. Both of these ways of indexing into the data frame yield a vector. We can also get a table that is composed only of the single column by writing AI invest, open square bracket, comma, the index of the column we want, close square bracket. So in this form of indexing, if we wanted a single element or a range of elements, we would put row, then comma, then column. If we leave the row value blank, we get all the rows. This returns a data frame, or in our case, a tibble, the special case data frame we got when we read in using reader. And the other way is we can put the name of the column quoted within the brackets. So we can write AI invest, open square bracket, year, in quotes, close square bracket. If for some reason I want those data frame results to be vectors, I can wrap the command in as.vector, and that will convert the result to a vector. So I write as.vector, open paren, AI invest, open square bracket, year, close square bracket, close paren, or I write as.vector, AI invest, bracket, comma, 3. In both cases, I get a vector result, which is the column. I'll put these ways of extracting a column in the script before I upload it. So that's a little introduction to working with columns in a data frame. I hope that it's helpful. I suggest you practice with this by downloading this table or one of the other interesting tables from ourworldindata.org and reading it in with the original column names and then your own, and then changing the column names and accessing the columns after you've read it in. Have fun with it.